Grammar Girl here. I'm Mignon Fogarty, your friendly guide to the English language. Today, wake up, because we're going to talk about one of the trickiest words in the English language. And then, once we're fully awake, we'll kick back and talk about words for vacation. What's the first thing you did this morning? Well, unless you worked an overnight shift, chances are you woke up. Or you awakened. Or awoke? Which is it? And why is it so hard to tell? Well, linguists have a saying, every word has its own history. And that history can affect current word meanings, pronunciations, and usages, and sometimes lead to confusion. The big problem with wake is that it's not just one verb, but four: wake, waken, awake, and awaken, each of which has intersected with the other three during the course of their history. And they've had a lot of time because they go all the way back to Old English. Wake and waken originally came from two different verbs: waken, which means to come into being or to become awake, and wasien, which meant to be awake. But although their meanings were similar, the way we handled them wasn't. Wake is an irregular verb with original past and participle forms woke and has waken. While waken is regular and forms its past and participle in the usual way by adding ed. That's already confusing enough, since the present tense regular form of one is the participle of the other. But alongside these forms, people also started putting an a at the beginning, saying to awake and to awaken. It's the same little a prefix we see on historical and regional forms, like he was a huntin' and a fishin'. Irregular verbs like wake, woke, are trickier than regular verbs like wake, waked, since we have to memorize all the different forms. That's why there's a tendency to turn irregular verbs into regular verbs, although sometimes the older irregular forms stick around as well. And that's what happened in Middle English during Chaucer's day. People added a regular past tense form to wake, but they still kept woke, so that now you could say either he woke at dawn or he waked at dawn. But then later, in Elizabethan times, people did something that happens less often. They switched again and gave wake an alternative, irregular participle, woken, maybe because they were tempted to match the verb break, broke, broken. Nobody knows why, but Shakespeare's contemporaries began saying things like, she has woken, while also still saying, she has waken. At the same time, confusingly enough, they were still using the entirely separate verb waken, as in, she has wakened. It was a mess. And just in case anyone in 1500s England was still feeling confident in their ability to keep all these different forms straight, someone had the bright idea to add up. So now we could have I woke, I woke up, I waked up, and I have waken, woken, waked, with or without the up. And don't forget the A forms, we're still kicking around too, so we also need to factor in awoke, awaked, awakened, and all its cousins. And I'm sure there's an equation we could use to calculate all the various possibilities here, but who among us would be able to do the math when we're in the middle of talking about our early mornings, especially before we've had our coffee? So what can we do to decide what verb and what past and participle forms to use? Well, some grammarians have suggested that we use waken for the transitive, meaning when the verb has an object, as in he wakened the baby, and use awaken in intransitive cases where the verb acts alone, as in he awakened at dawn. Now, this rule would be all well and good if it reflected actual usage, but it doesn't. And if it gave us some clue as to when to use the two main verbs, wake versus waken, and not just when to add an a to the beginning of the word and when not to. But again, it doesn't. Sources also vary on when to use up. It seems to go better with wake than waken, but not so well with either awake or awaken. To my ear, at least, I need to wake up sounds fine. But I need to waken up and we awoke up sound weird. Other people have suggested making a distinction between figurative and literal uses. But again, there's disagreement over whether the division is between wake and waken, the irregular and regular forms, or between the a-prefixed or unprefixed forms. So good luck deciding how to phrase a figurative usage like, my senses were woken by the inspirational poem. Maybe they were actually awoken, waked, wakened, awakened, or woken up. And maybe you'd be better off just changing your sentence to something like, my senses were heightened. Not exactly the same meaning, but a lot safer, grammatically speaking. And dictionaries aren't much help either. Depending on which one you consult, you'll see the predominant past tense of wake listed as either woke or waked, and the participle as has waked, has woken, has woked, and or has woke. It's also possible that there are differences in different countries. Garner's Modern English Usage says Americans prefer the participle waked, while Brits opt for woken. But that's not the whole story either. At least one source, the Dictionary of American Regional English, or DARE, indicates that while he waked at dawn and he has waked were indeed once widespread in the U.S. He woke and has woken are now taking over, based on usage data across different generations. We can still find pockets of speakers in the U.S. who use waked, for example in the South, where people tend to choose regular ed past tense forms over irregulars when there's a choice, for example with dived versus dove. But it looks like, in general, irregular woke and has woken are winning out in the U.S., at least for now. As for the historically regular verb waken, as in he wakened the baby or she has wakened early, DARE lists it as somewhat old-fashioned. So maybe these forms will fade away one day and we'll be left with only wake, woke, and woken, a relatively regular, irregular verb at long last. At this point, I'm hoping so. Incidentally, this dictionary is also a great source on where particular words are used. Think sub versus hoagie or pop versus soda versus Coke. I don't know about you, but these words are awakening up my taste buds. Or wait, is that supposed to be wakening? Waking up? Oh, never mind. Garner's usage guide is right when it notes that all these questions about wake and its related forms are perhaps the most vexing in the language. Indeed. Listeners have asked about all these verbs over the years, but ultimately, about the only advice we can give is that things are variable, and they still seem to be in flux even after all these centuries of change. The long, tangled history of wake and waken may not tell us when to use which form, but it teaches us a couple of important lessons anyway. First, although we may want to appeal to history to tell us how to use words correctly, this just doesn't always work, as forms fall in and out of favor, and today's most proper-sounding forms, she woke up, she dove into the pool, would likely have sounded odd or even wrong to Americans in the 1800s. And secondly, as much as we might want one single, proper, standard way of phrasing everything, we'll never have a complete certainty. Language is constantly changing, language standards change, and most changes leave remnants of earlier forms, contributing to today's richly varied linguistic landscape. That segment was written by Natalie Schilling, a professor emerita of linguistics at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and who runs a forensic linguistics consulting firm. You can find her on LinkedIn. We're heading into vacation season in the United States. Highways are starting to be jammed, pools will soon be packed, and campgrounds at capacity. With that in mind, let's talk about the word vacation and other ways to talk about taking time off. The word vacation comes from the Latin word vacat, which is a participle stem of the verb vacare, meaning to be empty or free. Other words that come from the same root are vacant and vacancy, as well as the obsolete words vacantry, meaning idleness, and vacature, meaning an annulment. Although people have surely been taking breaks since the beginning of time, the word vacation doesn't show up in print until 1386 in Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. In his poem, The Wife of Bath describes how one of her husbands had a book about wicked wives. The book tells about the most notorious wives in history, including Eve, Delilah, and Clytemnestra. The husband spends all his free time, his leisure and vacation, reading the book aloud to her as a form of torment. And by the way, don't worry about the wife of Bath. She winds up ripping some of the pages out of her husband's book, hitting him in the face, and convincing him to give her all of his estate. On another topic, I've talked before about our seemingly endless appetite for creating portmanteaus, words that mash together two parts of other words to make something new. Examples are spork, which combines spoon and fork, and smog, a combination of smoke and fog. Well, people have also come up with some fun portmanteaus related to vacations. There's staycation, time off when you don't travel but stay home to relax, do projects around the house, or enjoy the sights in your own hometown. There's faycation, a vacation you contrive to take by falsely calling in sick to work. There are even brocations and mancations, guys-only getaways where you get to do whatever it is guys do when they get together. Then, of course, there's glamping. This unmusical word is a mashup of glamorous and camping. It describes a luxurious outing very different from what you may have done as a Boy Scout or Girl Scout. Think of relaxing in a safari-sized tent built on a wooden platform, sleeping in a 4-poster bed with linen sheets, checking your phone via Wi-Fi, and sitting down to a gourmet meal provided by a personal chef. That is glamorous camping indeed. There's also a shortened word for vacation, vacay, V-A-C-A-Y, that's now an official entry in the Oxford English Dictionary. And if that upsets you, remember that dictionaries don't exist to validate new words. Rather, they document new words that are being consistently used over an extended period of time. That said, vacay is definitely a colloquial term. It's fine in conversation and in writing that has a casual tone, but leave it out of your formal writing. Another super short way of referring to time off is R&R, with an ampersand between the two R's and no spaces. This initialism is military shorthand for rest and recuperation, or rest and relaxation. There's another expression for being out of town or unavailable that we hear a lot too, at least in the business world. It's being out of pocket. This phrase sounds like newfangled jargon, but it actually appeared as early as 1908 in a short story by American author O. Henry. There's a similar phrase, out of commission, that suggests that someone isn't available, no longer around, or taking an extended break. This expression alludes to a ship that's been taken out of operation for repairs or held in reserve indefinitely. Finally, there's the way British people refer to their vacations. They talk about being on holiday. And fancy folk in general, well, they talk about weekending at different vacation spots. Once again, that's a phrase that sounds like modern jargon, but was actually in use in the early 1900s. I guess some things never change, like our habit of turning nouns into verbs. That segment was written by Samantha Ensslin, who runs Dragonfly Editorial. You can find her at dragonflyeditorial.com. And before we get to the Familect, I want to kind of answer a question that came in a couple of years ago now, because it's about a word I just used in this episode. Here we go.
Hi, Grammar Girl. My name is Meg Kelsey, and I'm an attorney in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I remember using your content when I was teaching English as a second language in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I've continued to reference your materials in practicing law throughout the past decade. Now I work at Regent Law School in the Center for Global Justice, leading a clinic that provides free legal representation to human trafficking survivors. We help them expunge or remove from their record crimes that they were forced to commit while being trafficked. The question I have is how to pronounce the process used to vacate these convictions, which I've heard pronounced vacator, vacator, vacatur, vacator, etc., etc. Is there a right way to pronounce this word? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Meg. And I'm sorry I don't always answer every question, but I often do remember them. And sometimes I actually do get to them after years go by. When your message came in, I looked the word up in a bunch of places and none had pronunciation. Not Merriam-Webster, not the OED, not Black's Law Dictionary. Dictionary.com, an American Heritage Dictionary, didn't even have the word. Finally, when I was searching again for this episode, I found a video of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor using the word, and she pronounced it vacatur. So that's what I went with and would recommend in the absence of any other definitive source. Thanks for the question, and good luck with your work. And finally, I have a Familect story.
Hello, I have a Familect example from my family in mid-Florida. We, as a family, watched Gilmore Girls, and one of the things that we heard in it was, "Oi, with the poodles already from feeling tired." So now, whenever one of us is tired, we would say, "Oi, with the poodles," or "There aren't enough poodles," which is kind of a funny brand. Anyway, thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks so much. And for people who aren't familiar with that line from Gilmore Girls, I found it on YouTube. Here's the original.
Yeah, I just realized. Oi is the funniest word in the entire world. I mean, think about it. You never hear the word oi and not smile. Impossible. Funny, funny word.
Oh, dear God.
Poodle is another funny word.
Please drink your drink, Lorelei.
In fact, if you put oi and poodle together in the same sentence, you'd have a great new catchphrase, you know? Like, oi with the poodles already. So from now on, when the perfect circumstances arise, we will use our favorite new catchphrase.
Thanks again for the call. If you want to share the story of your Familect, a word or phrase that you use only with your friends or family, leave a message on the voicemail line at 83321-4GIRL or leave a voice message on WhatsApp. Be sure to call from a nice quiet place, and if you want that number or link later, you can always find them in the show notes. Grammar Girl is a quick and dirty tips podcast, and we have lots of other shows. This week, The Modern Mentor is continuing her series on how to handle burnout if you're a manager. Again, that's the Modern Mentor podcast. Thanks to Nat Hoops in marketing, Morgan Christensen in advertising, Brandon Getchus, director of podcasts, Holly Hutchings in digital operations, and Dan Feierabend in audio, who's currently reading the Warrior series by Aaron Hunter. And I'm Mignon Fogarty, better known as Grammar Girl, and author of the tip-a-day book, The Grammar Daily. That's all. Thanks for listening.